Hi, I'm Maria from Nancy's Notions, and today I want to show you some essential tools for that beginner quilter. I've got a set gathered here that contains a pattern, a ruler, a spool of thread, a rotary cutter, and a rotary mat, and honestly, these are all the tools that you need to get started on your first quilt. So hopefully today we can take away some of the question about how to get started and some of the mystery about what to do with these tools that you see here. The very first quilt that I made was probably for my teddy bear as a kid, and my mom drew a square on a piece of cardboard and gave to me with a pen so I could draw shapes on fabric, cut them out, sew them together, and make my first little quilt. Well, now it is so much easier with these rotary tools. You've got a grid on the mat and on your ruler, and this rotary cutter is going to save you from having to cut all those things by hand with a scissor. So getting started today is way more easier than it was a long time ago. A couple other things that you're going to want to gather before you get started is some fabric, because you can't make a quilt without fabric, a sewing machine with a nice sharp needle in it, and an iron with some kind of ironing surface, whether it's an ironing board or a pad that sits on your table. We've got a fat quarter pack gathered here. These are all sold in one package, and look at all the beautiful colors that are already gathered for you. You don't even have to think about what matches. You can pick a pre-cut pack like this and go home and get started. Or you can pick yardage. You're going to go by the recipe or the list that's in a pattern, and it's going to tell you everything you need to know about how much fabric you need to make any given quilt. I just want to show you a couple of things on this very first page. It gives me a quilt type, a child, a throw quilt, a lap, full, queen, or king. Tells me what size those quilts are going to be. Tells me how many fat quarters I need to make those sizes, and how much binding fabric I need, as well as fabric for the back of my quilt and batting. So this is a great example of how easy it is to find out how much I need to make a quilt. It also gives me helpful notions, which are my rotary cutter, mat, and ruler, and a list of other things that you might already have in your sewing basket, or you might want to add if you like doing this project and you want to do more. Since this pattern calls for fat quarters, I want to explain what that is a little bit. A lot of fabrics are sold by the yard, so a fat quarter is created when I cut half a yard of fabric, which is 18 inches wide, and I'm going to cut that piece in half again, giving me an 18 by 22 inch piece that will look something like this. This is a great amount to get started with so that you aren't overwhelmed with a ton of yardage needed to make this quilt. So, how do I decide how many fat quarters I need? Well, you're going to look at the chart in the pattern, decide what size quilt you would like to make, and purchase or gather that many fat quarters. So if we take a look at the chart, here is the fat quarter laid out. If you look at the 18-inch edge and the 21-inch side, I need to cut all of these rectangles out of this fabric. What I see when I look at things like this, I try to find one line or maybe two that go all the way across the fabric to make it a little easier to get started. So if you look in between your A and C pieces, I can cut a straight line all the way across that fat quarter. And if I look in between D and E and F pieces, I've got another straight line where I can get started. So a few basic rules about cutting. Number one, this blade is super sharp. When I squeeze this handle, and see how the blade just moved? It exposes that rotary blade out here past the cutter. So now if my finger runs along that, I will be heading to the emergency room for stitches. So you just want to be careful. I don't want to frighten you, but remind you to be careful. When I'm done cutting, this little red button is on both sides. If I press it here, makes a little click, and now I can't accidentally expose that blade until I'm ready. So when I'm ready to cut, press the button again. Now that blade opens up. You always want to use the blade on top of the rotary cutting mat. The mat is self-healing, which means when you cut across it, you're not going to leave a groove behind. Now, because of the size of my ruler, you can see that my fabric is longer than my ruler. So a very simple way to deal with that is to take your fabric and fold it in half. I'm going to line up my edge kind of along one of the grid lines on the mat, and I want to overlap one of the lines here to clean it up to give myself a straight edge for my second cut. So first cut, I'm going to take that ruler, lay it on top of the fabric, and I'm going to line the edge of the ruler along that straight grid. Open my blade. I'm going to squeeze that handle to expose my blade, and I want to line the blade up perpendicular to the edge of my ruler. I'm going to start off the fabric and follow that all the way along the edge. There's my little bit of scrap, and there's my straight line to start measuring off of. Like we talked about before with the fat quarter and the chart that's in my pattern, my A pieces are what I'm going to cut first. So from my straight line, I'm going to move that ruler over 4 inches, which is here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and cut another straight line. Some patterns will tell you to cut a strip and then subcut the strip. It's not what this one is telling me, but I do need 2 A pieces out of here. So because I've already got it folded in half, I'm going to turn it on the mat, line it back up along those lines, and the other measurement I need for A is an 8-inch long piece. So in the end, they're going to be 4 inches by 8 inches. So that easy. I have an A and another A. I'm going to continue in this manner across that fat quarter, and here are my parts cut for the quilt. I'm going to label them because it's so much easier to keep track of what goes where later on in the instructions. These 3 stacks that are left are extra. You can stack those up and put them in your new stash bin for that fabric stash you're going to start collecting. Now I'm going to rearrange the pieces to construct the block, and I'm going to use the simple chart that's in my pattern so that I don't have to guess where those pieces go. As a new quilter, I don't want you to get alarmed that the pieces don't fit together on the table perfectly the way they lay. When you sew things together, you're going to remove 1/4 of an inch from this side and 1/4 of an inch from this side, 1/4 of an inch here and here, here and here, and then in between these, as well as in between here. So right now they look like they don't fit, but they will when we get the block done. The next fun part, I don't want my block to be all this same fabric. I've got several colors stacked here that we cut up to get ready. So my top layer might be pink, and then there's turquoise and some orange and gray and that underneath. So a really easy way to do this is to take one of the top pieces and put it on the bottom. I'm still going to keep my label there because I don't want to forget. The next one, maybe I'm going to take the 2 top pieces and put them on the bottom. And I'm going to keep going like this until I have all different colors exposed on the top here. And there's no rule about which order you go in, which is part of the fun of this. And as easy as that, I have all different colors exposed on top there to start assembling my blocks. I'm going to start with the A's like we talked about before. So I'm going to take one from one pile, one from the other, and I want to line up this short end, aligning raw edges. All I should see is the fabric on top. I'm going to line up this edge with the edge of my presser foot. I've chosen a piecing stitch on this machine, which puts the needle 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of this foot. You're going to have to check your manual that comes with your machine to find out how to achieve that 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to put my fabric underneath that foot. I'm going to line up those raw edges with the side of my presser foot. Put that foot down and stitch. And just like that, you've got your first 2 pieces put together. So another important aspect about quilting is pressing. So I've got my ironing pad here along with my iron. I'm simply going to lay those pieces on the pad and I'm going to give it a little press. What this does is set the thread, and I'm going to peel that top piece over and press it again from this side, smoothing that out. I want a nice clean crease right here along my stitching. Every iron has different settings. I like to set mine on the high heat. And I do like a little steam when I'm quilting, so I turn it on to the lowest setting of steam. I don't need to get a face wash with that steam coming up, but I do like the way it works when I'm piecing my quilt blocks. Okay, so that simple little bit of piecing is going to get your feet wet. I'm going to go ahead and assemble the rest of this block. I am only using the top layer of fabric of all these cut pieces. Each layer is going to create another block. So just stick to the top ones for now, and we'll have a block here in a minute. Here is my pieced block, and you can see hanging out around the edges are the edges of the next layers of fabric that will make another block, but look at how much that shrinks up in that piecing process. Now, I like to go back to the rotary mat and trim up any ragged edges that may have occurred when I put this together. As I'm trimming, I'm going to make sure that each square is the same size as the next one. So when I go to finish assembling, they're all going to fit together like a perfect puzzle. This is one combination of color, but if you look behind me at the sample hanging on the wall, that's a whole nother set of fat quarters. So look at how it changes from the blues and yellows behind me to this rainbow of bright, fun colors in front of me. Even back when I was a kid, I loved puzzles, and I think that's part of why I still love quilting today. I love looking at color, and I see patterns that just make me feel happy, and I want to make them. So I buy fabric, I cut it up into little pieces, and I sew it all back together again to make myself a quilt. Whether it's for class or if it's for my own pleasure at home, it doesn't matter. I love to sew. So if you're like me and you want to get started quilting, start with these basic tools that we showed you before. Your first quilt is going to be a lot more accurate than mine was when I used those cardboard squares as a kid. But look at how far we've come. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, hit the like button and comment below telling us what you think. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. We encourage you to show us your completed projects and the tools that you used. Even if it's just a stack of fabric because you're getting started, I'd love to see it. Feel free to post a photo on Instagram and use hashtag Nancy's Notions. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm sure I'm going to see you again soon.
Never rolling.
Are we really?
Yeah.
Oh, darn it.
Okay, I'll make it official. And action!
All right, there's no need to feel overwhelmed when starting a new craft like this. There I go again. I know, but I say that. Nancy says you say that a lot. That and yep. I say yep. This is the best part.
Quilting.
So in conclusion, now you've got your feet welt.
Good start.